He is a 9-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier and a guy that I've wanted to get on this show for quite some time. Bernie Schultz joins me this week on...
I'm Bob Cobb from the Bassmaster. Welcome to Mercer.
Welcome all, friends, family, freeloaders, fishing freaks, and of course, you, my humpers. Happy hump day to all of you, and welcome into the Awkwardly Honest Fishing Podcast that goes by my last name, which is Mercer. This is the 221st edition of the Mercer Podcast, and I hope wherever you're watching or listening from, that life is treating you well. It is a big week in the fishing world. Orlando, Florida is where iCast is going down. So a lot of folks from the fishing world are migrating to Orlando to get together and sweat and talk about what I'm predicting will be Dice-O-Rama 2025. There will be an insane amount of tentacles and dice-style baits released at this year's show. As always is. I mean, there's a trend that always follows, and that is a big trend in fishing. So, yeah, if you want to dice, well, there'll be a lot to choose from. Let's just put it that way. Special shout out to Kyle Patrick. Kyle Patrick, boy, what a scary situation. Literally almost had a heart attack. And it all started from a tick. Got bit by a tick, had no idea about it. His temperature started to spike. He had 104-degree temperature. Went to the emergency room. I'm not educated enough to explain it. I just know what me and him have corresponded back and forth, but literally had a lot of issues with his heart and is going to be in hospital for the next week. Hopefully he's back in time for Lake St. Clair. I'm sure he will be, but scary, scary stuff. So check yourself for ticks, because Kyle Patrick, about as healthy a dude as I know, found himself in the hospital, and he's there right now. So thoughts and prayers to Kyle. And I'd like you guys to help me and send out some of those thoughts and prayers as well to him, because he's a great dude and scary, scary situation for all of us. I mean, anybody that spends time in the outdoors, you risk that. And it's scary to think of just how quick. And he had no idea he even got bit. He had no idea until he went to the hospital. So, Bernie Schultz is going to be a fun show here this week. And I mean, if I was better at my job, we would have recorded the conversation we had after we recorded. But we got talking about all the new baits being released at iCast and how nothing's really new. I mean, he showed me the first spy bait that was like from the 1800s, the first frog from the 1800s. So nothing's really new, but it is a new version of, but yeah, if I was a lot smarter, better at my job, that would have been the topic. But we cover a lot of things. Bernie has had an incredible career. He's been around for a long time. He's seen a lot of different things, and he is never short of sharing his opinion. And once again, he is exactly that guy, which makes for a very good podcast. So buckle up and enjoy this one with the one and only Bernie Schultz. Bernie Schultz, thank you for doing this. I've been a big fan of yours for years. I was a fan of yours long before the Elite Series. I remember you fishing Canadian Opens, and at that time, there wasn't a lot of Americans that would come up and compete in those events. You obviously contended at a bunch of them, won one of them, I believe, and so that was kind of a big deal. Bernie Schultz is coming to Kingston to compete in the Canadian Open. So that's, I think, when my fandom of you started.
Yeah, those are fond memories. I love that fishery, as you well know. And first time I went there was for a bass event. It was actually a team tournament that Ray Scott put on. And we went out of Clayton, and I just fell in love with the place and just started going back every year. And I found out about the Canadian Open and entered that, got to be friends with some of the Canadian anglers, Azumi, Dan Crawford, there's, Big Jim. And I don't know. I just, each year it seemed like I stayed longer and longer. I actually won 2. I won the Canadian Open, and they had a tournament. I think it might have run 1 or 2 years, the Canadian Cup, which was at Rio Clary. And I won that tournament, but had a lot of high finishes in the Open. That was a really well-run tournament, a lot of fun.
Did you ever meet Lynn Johnson back in the day?
I remember Lynn vaguely, but I do remember Lynn. I didn't know he was going to raise 2 killers on tour that I got to begin with. I would have buried him a long time ago. But Lynn's a good guy, and Johnston's they're awesome fishermen, both boys. In fact, I got a up close and personal lesson with Chris at the last event on 10 killer. We were fishing the same stretch, and I made the mistake of fishing off the fish, tried to double back, and he got there ahead of me, and boy, it was a clinic. He really tore him up.
Yeah, they have been a problem from the day. Like they've been winning tournaments since they were little kids. Like it's crazy. Lynn spent a bunch of time with them in the boat, and here's the bad news: they spend a bunch of time in the boat with their kids. Like when they're not at elites, you almost never see Corey and Chris on the water not with their kids. Like their kids are in the boat with them all the time. And I'm like, look at those little savages. They look like cute little kids, but in 15 years,
they're in
Trey
training.
McKinney's going to be like, I hate those kids.
Yeah, they're in training. He just doesn't know it yet. Yeah.
You've been around a long time, fishing bass and being part of bass in many ways.
Yeah.
When you look at what it was like year one versus today, I mean, is there any similarities anymore?
It's yes and no. I mean, the guys that are getting into the sport now are much younger on average. When they enter this, the top tiers of competitive fishing, the average age is much younger. I think the mean when I was in, just getting started, I think was like mid-30s.
Yeah. And
now I got to believe that at least each year it's got to be dropping. It's got to be getting close to, if not below 30, maybe in the upper 20s. And I think it'll continue to go younger. Probably the most noticeable thing for me, when I got on tour, it was a learning curve. The kids that come in now, or I shouldn't say just kids, because there are some older guys that are coming in, they're so well versed. They're very prepared. I learned a lot when I got on tour. Back then they were draw tournaments. So you were paired with another pro. Ideally you would split the day, whether whose boat you went in, somebody got to run the boat half the day and then the other guy should, but it didn't always work out that way. But, there's a lot of lessons made that way, a lot of information gained that way, watching a guy up close like that. And the two of you working together in many cases to develop patterns or figure out what lure, what depth, whatever. That doesn't happen now. You're on your own. You're out there, and we don't even have co-anglers. I have to tell you, when we had co-anglers, sometimes I benefited by having a co-angler in the back of the boat. Sometimes I got stung by having a co-angler in the back of the boat. They're catching your fish as well as you are, and over the course of a 4-day event, that's very costly when there's only so many fish to go around. But yeah, I think the biggest difference for me, Dave, is the fact that the newest generations of anglers are so well educated and prepared compared to when I started. Like I said, it was a complete, it was overwhelming. I thought I knew how to fish until I got on tour, and then I realized I had a ton to learn.
Yeah, it's now you don't have time. I mean, now it's you're gone. If it takes, which, I mean, is a tough. Why do you think that's happening? Like, is this just the evolution of the sport that it's getting younger, or why do you think it's happening?
Electronics is a big factor in the most recent years. I point the finger at electronics. Kids are born with cell phones in their hands these days.
Yeah.
And that starts it. Those are the stepping stones. And it's, video games and, everything's electronic now. None of that existed when you and I got started. When I was an illustrator for bass, everything was done by hand.
Yeah.
Now it's all digital. And I became obsolete. I chose not to learn to illustrate, in a digital manner. So I kind of, got phased out by that technology. And that's kind of happening to me in fishing now. I'm trying to keep up, but it's tough. The kids are so they're just comfortable with it. And it's not comfortable for a guy that fishes by instinct or by, trial and error. Like guys of my generation and maybe, somewhere in between the newest generations, Keith Combs, guys like that, they're more traditional in their approach. It's trial and error. You gain what you learn as you go, and you draw on experience. And none of that seems to matter anymore. It seems like it's all about electronics.
Yeah, it is a big factor. And I mean, you used one example. I mean, I read an article a little while ago about digital disturbance and how it's affected every business. I mean, and you just used a prime example of illustration. Yeah. I mean, we saw how digital disruption has affected. I'm sure you also remember listening to photographers talk about digital cameras and being like, yeah, that's not, I mean, if you think of just the, never mind competing at a competition, but like the act of like, I just take pictures at a wedding, not to demean that, but to catch the moment at a wedding, the kiss, whatever, before was a lot more difficult than it is now. You not only catch the moment, but you can check right and see, and obviously you see what's happened with that. Is that something that is a good thing in your opinion, or is it it's gonna happen, or like it's weird?
It's inevitable. I mean, it's change is inevitable. It's a constant, and you can either keep up with it or you can get buried by it. And I'm trying to keep up, but it's challenging. And I'm kind of a purist. I appreciate the sport all the way back to its very beginnings. You well know I'm into the history of the sport, the tackle related to the sport and its development. And that purist approach a lot of times gets you in trouble. I don't always keep an open mind. I'm trying to make things work when they shouldn't, or when there's something better that is applicable. So I don't know. I like your comparison to photography, because a purist photographer probably hated digitized cameras or digital cameras. I mean, cameras nowadays, they'll take a picture before you pull the trigger. Yeah.
Literally.
And it's perfect. Literally. Yeah. And it's perfect. So I don't know. I'm caught in between, Dave. I'm trying to think young, but I'm an old guy and with a lot of old habits.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at video cameras, they literally take they'll cache 30 seconds, 15 seconds before you've even hit. So if you miss the hook set, you didn't miss the hook set. Like, I mean, it is wild that way. Is this the biggest throughout your career? You've obviously seen a lot of changes. Is this the biggest single change?
It's monumental for sure. It seems like, other than the political battles in the past where new tours would develop and some of the anglers would go one way and others would stay loyal, those were big transitional periods. But I think electronics probably define the evolution of the sport as good as anything. I mean, when I started fishing, we used flashers. And we were pretty good with them. You could get a lot done with a flasher, but that's all we had. And then the paper graph came out, and that was a controversy in its own right. A lot of guys didn't like paper graphs. They thought, oh, that's not right. Now you can take, pictures of the bottom of structure, whatever the bottom of the lake looks like. And then side scanning came out, and that was controversial. So every phase in the development of electronics as it relates to fishing is controversial to some degree. But I think with forward-facing sonar, that is the most talked about, and you either love it or you hate it. It's almost like there's no in between. I really like the technology. I'm challenged with it, and I'm sure you've heard this on previous interviews that everything that we learned up until forward-facing sonar showed up, you could pretty much throw out the window. I was trained to believe that bass traveled on underwater highways, and they had these stopping points, and they had these routes, and they it was like migration. That's out the window. The fish use the entire water column. Yeah, they relate to structures along creek channels or, physical objects like stumps or lily pads or whatever it is. But they swim way more randomly than I thought. And it took forward-facing sonar to teach me that, live scope, to teach me that fish are using pretty much the whole water column, and they're doing it randomly. They're schooling fish, but there's a whole lot of rogues out there that we didn't realize, and they're constantly moving around or suspending. So, in that sense, I really love the technology. It's opened my eyes to what really is happening down there. But competing with young guys, that's a different, that's a whole different thing.
You brought up draw tournaments, and everybody knows that's how it started, where you would split the boat with somebody.
Yeah.
How different is the forward-facing sonar evolution if it was draw events now?
Oh, yeah, that's tough. I don't know how that would work, to be honest with you. I mean, I guess two guys could still do that, and I don't know. Guys were so headstrong. I mean, when you get in a sport, you're pretty confident in what you're doing. You want to compete, you want to prove yourself. And back when there were draw tournaments, there was a lot of headbutting going on. If you lost a coin toss, you felt like immediately you were at a disadvantage. In many cases, it worked out in your favor. You might have thought you were on fish, but the guy you drew was way better off and had enough to share, where your day was actually better than had you chose to go to your fish. But then there were times when it cost you. So, to try and incorporate forward-facing sonar in that scenario, I don't know how that would work.
I'm sure it would make for some good TV, if nothing else.
Yeah, there could be somebody might end up swimming in that deal.
Did people sometimes end up swimming in the draw tournaments, Bernie?
No, but there were some pretty ugly confrontations. I was easy to get along with. I mean, I was younger at that phase, and I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
I was smart enough to know right away that I didn't know squat. I mean, I figured out in a hurry, I better just listen to these guys, observe these guys, and hope I draw the right guy on a given body of water to really, maximize the input. And I was lucky. I drew I had great draws. Learned a lot in a short period of time and started getting some momentum on my own. And then we eventually had the, co-angler deal. I fished FLW a lot before bass. Well, I actually did them both, but dedicated some years to FLW, then came back over to bass. And so co-anglers were a phase in my development that overall I think was beneficial. When you have another lure in the water, you're getting more information.
Yeah.
It may not be you catching the fish, but you can sometimes gain something from the guy in the back of the boat. And I tried to keep an open mind, and I learned a lot from the guys in the back of the boat. In many cases, they were really talented. In some cases, they were really lucky. But whatever brought the information, I didn't care. I just, I was basically a sponge for more information.
So long before you threw your hat in a national tour and fished bass or FLW, when did you have a moment where you were like, when did you figure out I have to figure out a way to fish for a living?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. We were talking, I was traveled out to the Classic with Shaw. Shaw's my neighbor, by the way. And anyway, we did a lot of talking.
You won't have any trouble with gators if he's your neighbor, I guess.
No, he's good at that. He knows how to wrestle a gator. Good at a lot of things, really. But anyway, we were talking about the old times. You're talking about a 12-hour drive. A lot gets talked about. But I don't know. I just I got in a club by default. I was going to the University of Florida right here in Gainesville. And one of my instructors was in a bass club, and he figured out that I like to fish, I guess by the shirts I wore, I don't know. But anyway, we started fishing together, and he said, man, you need to be in our club. We meet on Mondays at this place next to campus, and you're too good a fisherman. You should come join our club. So he talked me into it. I had no intentions of fishing a tournament. I was just more curious about what the club was about and see who in town had similar interests. And next thing I know, my name's in a hat, and I drew out with Shaw Grigsby in a night tournament. That was my first draw in a tournament ever, and it was an incredible experience. Shaw didn't win, but he was second, and it was a topwater deal the whole night, and I learned a ton in that one night.
Today's high-tech fishing world can be a real pain in the neck, especially if you're running the wrong mount. Beat Down Outdoors, they bring the graph to you. And they support this podcast and care enough about you to make this a short ad read. Check out Beat Down Outdoors. Now back to the show.
That kind of got me into tournament fishing on the club level. And then Shaw invited me to fish some buddy tournaments with him. And I was fishing with some other guys. And one thing led to another. And next thing I know, I'm fishing state and regional tournaments. The Redman Tour came to Florida. I jumped in. I went to their championship and won the Gator division, won a boat. The phone started ringing, and sponsors were, wanting to use my endorsement. And I guess being in a 12-month fishery, that was helpful. I was young, and I don't know. I wasn't intimidated by media or any of that stuff. I was able to communicate with writers and videographers and photographers, all that. So I don't know. One day, all of a sudden, I realized, man, I don't really want to work for a living if I can fish. So I'm going to try this and see what happens. Here I am.
If you hadn't gone this route, what do you think you would have ended up doing for a living?
I would have been an illustrator. In fact, I had a job offer from Travel Magazine in New York to come up there and do, it was basically a graphics position. A buddy of mine who I collaborated with at the university, it was kind of our senior thesis. He was a copywriter and I was an illustrator. So we worked together on a campaign for the Civitan Regional Blood Center. And our campaign was published, and he used that in his portfolio, and he got a job with Travel Guide magazine. And they asked him who did the illustrations, and he said, a buddy of mine. Well, I still had one more quarter to go in school before I graduated. He graduated a little ahead of me and was already in New York. And he calls me up and says, man, these people want to hire you. And I said, okay, that sounds good. I'll be done in June. I'll come up and we'll work out. Well, when that date came, I called him and I started getting anxious about it. And I called him. I said, are you happy in New York? I'm trying to picture myself in New York City, Manhattan, working and wearing a suit, going to work and all that. He said, dude, as soon as I can get a job somewhere else, I'm out of here. And that ended it for me. We both surfed, we both fished, and I knew if he wasn't happy, I wouldn't be happy there. So I abandoned that, and fishing was starting to get going at that time. That's when I was in the club and seeing a little bit of success there. And I did referral artwork around town for a couple of years, and that's what kept me going. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for $100 a month. I mean, you couldn't beat it. So I didn't have a whole lot of overhead, and I had a whole lot of free time because I was basically, dictating my own schedule.
Yeah.
I'd draw at night and fish in the daytime.
Wow.
Yeah.
That stands out to me as different for a lot of people, because at that age, whenever people have job opportunities, most of the time they equate happiness to a dollar sign. They're like, well, I'm going to make how much in the big city or whatever, but for you to, I mean, I think for somebody at your point to look at somebody and say, are you happy? That makes total sense. But did it stand out as different a way of thinking? What did that come from? Is that just ingrained in a surf bum to search for happiness? Or
I think so. I mean, he and I we had so many similar interests, and we were good buddies. We did a lot of beach trips together, and I figured I better check with him before I commit to this. This is a big commitment, leaving Florida to go live in a huge city. I did spend my high school years in Miami, so I was used to big city environment, dense population, but there was water all around me. I had the beach. I lived on a canal that went to the bay. The Keys were right there. We were in the Keys all the time fishing. So I just, New York just seems so foreign, just a concrete jungle. And I was trying to figure in my mind, how am I going to be happy in that? So I felt like I better check with him before I commit to anything. I didn't want to waste anybody's time. They were trying to set up an interview, a date, and I don't know. I just got anxious as it approached, and glad I asked, because in retrospect, I think I made a good choice.
I would say.
Yeah.
Do you still? I know you don't. You say you got kind of phased out of the illustration world. Do you still do art recreationally?
Yeah, a little bit. I did a series for Bass, and it's kind of interesting how I got started illustrating for Bassmaster. But do you remember Tim Tucker?
Yeah,
the famous writer. Yeah, Tim was right here in Gainesville, and because Shaw and I were so close, we were his subjects in a lot of articles, and we were just handy for photo shoots, handy for we were just a phone call away for an interview. And he did a story with me on fishing hydrilla at its various stages of growth. And he sent the story in, and Dave Preck saw it and sent it to the art department. Well, the art department really wasn't familiar with what I was trying to convey in the story. So they asked Tim to have me do some stick figure drawings, so to speak, of what I was trying to convey, so they could have their in-house artists interpret that and put it in a layout. Well, I drew what I thought it should look like, and the next thing I know, Dave Preck calls me and goes, "You want to be an illustrator for Bass?" And I said, "Sure, why not? This will make my mom happy. She paid for my college, and if I can fish, as long as I doesn't interrupt with my tournaments, yeah, I'll do it." Well, that led to a 10-year stint as an illustrator with Bass. And Dave got to the point where he saw some of my writing. I was writing for a regional publication and a little bit for Florida Sportsman back then, which was the Bible for fishermen in Florida. And he saw that I could write. And he said, "Do you want to do a series on techniques? I'd like you to call it, I'd like to call it Techniques Illustrated. It would be yours to write and illustrate. And I'd like to do it for a year." And I said, "Sure, I can do that." And it was so popular, Dave, it ran almost 5 years.
Yeah.
And I ended it only because at that point I was fishing FLW and bass and having a lot of success in both. I was making their championship. I was making the classic. I was finishing high in tournaments. I won a couple of tournaments. And so meeting deadlines was getting increasingly more difficult. I was on the road a lot. I was trying to pre-fish a lot. So that kind of ended, but I kept the writing part going. Illustrating took more time than writing.
Yeah.
So I've been a columnist for Bass since the early 90s.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you, you say a little bit, like, do you recreationally, some days do you wake up and say, I want to draw? Like,
Do I want to draw? I sketch, doodle sometimes. Every once in a while I'll get a request to draw something for someone, but I'm not doing it as a supplement to my income or anything. I still have the skills. I don't have any kind of shakes or anything that people my age usually get. So I still have that. But I don't know, maybe when I'm off the tour, I might pick up art again.
Yeah. Wow. Have you always been like, if you write and if you draw, have you always been attracted to the arts, so to speak?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, ever since I was a kid. I was raised up until high school. I lived in north central Florida in a place called Sanford.
Okay.
Kind of east of Orlando. It's gotten swallowed by Orlando, but there was a time when Sanford was bigger than Orlando. And Sanford was a port city on the St. Johns River in Lake Monroe. And I lived on a lake that was adjacent to a stream that flowed into the St. Johns River. So I had a lot of water around me as a kid. But I lived outside of town, so I didn't have any friends until I got a little older. We lived, on a lake, on one side of the lake, pretty much by ourselves. So I entertained myself fishing, traipsing through the woods, and drawing those experiences, I guess. The arts, I wouldn't say I'm a conceptual artist. I'm an illustrator. I like to, draw on paper. I don't try to visualize these profound concepts, real cerebral concepts. And, I'm not that deep a thinker when it comes to art. I just like to draw what appeals to me.
Well, I mean, it's you. I remember your illustrations from Bassmaster magazine. I mean, I think weirdly enough, I've always said, because I've done a lot of work in video over the years, and I always look at illustration and I look at still pictures as like, it's wild they have an advantage. Like, and I use the example of, if you take a video of a boat jumping over this giant wave, you'll watch that video and you'll be like, wow, that's incredible. But after you watch it 10 times, you're like, I've seen it. But if you have a picture or a drawing of that same boat, you can look at it for years. It's amazing, like how the human mind works, that if you almost give less to somebody, it gives them more. Like, I mean, I have an Overstreet picture in my house and I look at it all the time. And it's actually the spot. He took a picture of the exact spot where Forrest Gump stopped running. And it's just like the highway and the mountains behind it and everything. It's a really cool, but I'm like, I've seen that scene in the movie and I could never tell you exactly what it looked like, but I've stared at that picture for years because it's like you give the human mind less and somehow it creates more.
We're really lucky in our sport. The fact that it attracts so many talented people outside of the fishing skills. I mean, we got great photographers, great writers, videographers, producers. I mean, this sport is blessed with a lot of talent. I mean, Sago and Andy and Gerald Crawford, the old, back in the day, and Overstreet and Shan. I mean, there's so many guys. I can't even think all their names. There's just a lot of really talented people around our sport. And then the writers, there's less emphasis on print media than there used to be, obviously, because of social media, and those multiple platforms have kind of, put it, and made it, I don't want to say antiquated, but it is dated to some degree when you compare the lead time with print magazines and stuff like that compared to immediate, the immediate aspects of social media or digital platforms. But we are lucky to have the talent around us that we do and documenting the sport. I think that's what's elevated the sport as much as the anglers. I think it's the people around us that prop us up and are, documenting the sport as it goes. Very important. Bob Cobb.
Oh, yeah.
Dave Precht, Ken Duke, guys like that.
Do you think that's got to do? I mean, I have a theory that everybody who's part of this, no matter what you are, you're part of it because you love it. You're not part of, like, you didn't move to New York to chase money. You're part, you decided that this is more important than money to me. And I think everybody's like photographers, there's very few people, writers, every single facet, anybody that's connected to it, even Trip Weldon, tournament directors. I mean, he didn't become a tournament director because he was like, oh, that's a quick way for me to make a bunch of money. He did it because he loves it. It's passion.
Yeah, passionate about what they do. I think that's throughout the ranks.
Yeah.
Whatever your degree of involvement with the sport, it's all about passion and wanting to be a part of it. I've been lucky. I mean, I haven't set any records on the scales. You know that. I've survived a lot of decades doing what I like to do, but I think it's probably because I could write a little bit, I could draw a little bit, and I could fish a little bit. And lucky for me, there weren't a lot of guys that could do all three.
Yeah.
So I was able to survive that way. And it's about survival. I mean, if you get down to it, it's very competitive in each of those sectors. But I was lucky enough to be able to bridge those three skill sets and make a living, kind of craft a living out of it.
If you could go back and give year one Bernie, the first Bassmaster event you fished, first big tour level event you fished, if you could give that guy some advice the night before that all happened, what would it be?
slow down. When you're first getting started, you're going a mile a minute. You need to slow down and really think things through. I may be ADHD, I'm not sure, but or ADD, something that kind of accelerates me through, the process on tournament day. And I'm thinking instead of focusing. Does that make sense? I'm kind of scrambled in my thoughts. And I think early in my career, I needed to slow down, and I would have had a lot more success. Last half of my career, I've probably fished too slow. I remember something Terry Scroggins said to me after weighing in an elite tournament one day. He came over and says, "Man, were you broke down? I mean, I almost came over to see if you're okay." And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, why did you sit in one spot so long?" And I said, "Well, I figured the fish were coming to me." He goes, "Haven't you ever heard of the element of surprise?" And I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "Well, you got to let them breathe a while, go do something else, come back." And which Van Dam made a career out of by cycling through several areas, letting them rest, going to the next. I was guilty of not doing that on too many occasions. I sat on spots, sometimes in fear of losing that position, that spot, or missing part of the window when they do decide to feed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I fish glacial speed nowadays, and it looks like I'm broke down sometimes. But I got a lot of patience that I didn't have when I was young.
Well, that advice from Scroggins is ironic, because Scroggins is one of the. He doesn't get for whatever reason. People talk about speed with Van Dam and stuff, but as a guy who's covered a lot of you guys on the water, Scroggins is one of the fastest anglers. Me and Overstreet used to talk about it all the time, and we talked to him about it, and his answer, being Scroggins, being like, "Hammer, when do you usually catch him? After you've been there a half hour, when you just first roll up?" And when you think about it like that, it makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. He's the other extreme. I'm too slow. He's maybe too fast. I don't know. And part of that's his St. Johns River training. People don't realize that, but you're fishing a tide, and that tide is kind of at different parts of the river is going off. The bite window happens at a certain phase of the tide during his, course of an 8-hour day. He's trying to maximize his opportunities by hitting these different spots at the peak part of the tide. And I think that's why he carried that training with him to stagnant waters like, lakes or reservoirs that don't have moving water all the time. He's just a fast-paced angler. He's had a lot of success.
He has. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that I don't know if you're comfortable with answering, but I know you. I don't ever think I think you've answered any question I've ever asked you. So I'm pretty sure you answer this.
Avco not only makes incredible outdoor clothing, but they care about anglers with their 10% pledge. Avco and the Shed family donate at least 10% of the company's profits to conservation and making fishing better. Now back to the show.
Who are the top 3 most impressive pros that you've ever competed against?
Ooh, I hate to knock it down to 3.
Well, you can go whatever direction, but we've only got so much time.
I have a loyalty to Shaw, and Shaw, he's a great angler. He's proven himself. Yeah. He's won a bunch of tournaments and nearly won a classic, missed it by ounces one time. But I think that the thing that impressed me most about Shaw is his character in competition, his sportsmanship. I have a lot of respect for that. He plays by the rules, doesn't bend the rules. There's no gray area. It's black and white, and he's on the right side of the rules. And he's also, very fair on the water. He doesn't like territorial disputes. He would try to work with somebody rather than confront them or be confronted. So he's in the top 3 for that reason. Roland Martin, and I know Roland's a controversial person, but I know Roland from outside of bass fishing. We did a lot of tarpon and saltwater fishing together, and Roland is a genius. He literally can navigate by the stars. I've seen it. and he's adept at catching bass as well as catching tarpon with a fly rod. I mean, the guy was so eat up with fly rod fishing for tarpon, he made his own fly reel. He bought a lathe, bar stock aluminum, and milled his own fly reel.
Come on.
True story.
Wow.
I got to cast with it. It was rough, but it worked. And you know, somebody that can do that and is that passionate about the sport. And you know, we spent a lot of hours on the flats chasing tarpon. He's just a really good fisherman at a bunch of levels, you know, not just bass fishing. He's familiar with a lot of different species and very adept at pursuing those species. And he's, you know, brilliant when it comes to electronics, navigation, all that. He knows the sport at a lot of levels people never even consider. So maybe he's in there, and as controversial as he is for some, to me, I appreciate his, you know, his ability on all those different levels of the sport. God, to narrow it down to a third, I mean, you got to appreciate Rick Clunn just for what he's achieved. Very cerebral. He kind of thinks differently than anybody I've ever been around in the sport. And I have an appreciation for that. And he's a good teacher. I learned a lot from Rick on the water and off the water. He taught me lessons he didn't even realize he was teaching me. You know, I just absorbed things from him by observation. But Dave, there are so many guys. I mean, I could go on and on about, you know, we're talking about pro anglers.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot out there. I'd like to think I learned something from just about anybody I was in contact with.
What do you think people learned from you?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, I was in a good position to teach people with my series, Techniques Illustrated. The concept of Techniques Illustrated, which ran in Bassmaster for 5 years, was take a pro with his best technique and convey that to the reader. And so I interviewed these guys like, you know, Guido Hibden on trying to catch a bass, a cruising bass. I did a piece on him on sight fishing cruising bass. And a lot of people think of him as strictly a bed fisherman when it comes to sight fishing, but he was really skilled at fooling a fish that was just swimming down the bank. He knew the angle to present the lure, how to tease the bait, how to let the bait descend just at the right time where the fish wouldn't be spooked but would be attracted or not turned off. You know, there was a fine line in making that lure rendezvous with the fish at the right time, and he was the best at that. I don't know. There's so many guys that taught me things like that, but I think that was the advantage I had, is I was able to get one-on-one with the pro and, you know, absorb what it was that he did so well and then convey that to the reader, both through illustration and the text.
And you did it at a time where, I mean, if you're hearing this now and you're like, well, yeah, we can watch live and see that. We can, I mean, yeah. you were exposing stuff that there was no other way you'd ever get to. I mean, even if you look at Bob Cobb and me have joked about it, where, I mean, the old Bassmaster shows get so much notoriety and people say how great they are. And they were at the time, but very rarely did they ever catch a lot of what actually happened in the tournament. You know what I mean? Like it was, or with the leader, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of, it was a lot of made up stuff but to make a show, which what you do. So you were exposing it at a time where nobody would expose it. Did you ever, as a competitor, did you ever have trouble with that? Like trying to get certain guys to give you the goods?
No, once they saw where it was going, back then Bassmaster was a huge way to promote your sponsor. That platform was invaluable. It was kind of the best place to promote product, because everybody at that time, that period in our sport, read Bassmaster or other similar publications. And so printed material was a way to ensure your relationships with your sponsors. And most guys saw the wisdom in utilizing that platform. So it wasn't really hard. And I'd approach them in a way where it was non-threatening. I wasn't asking them to give up, the goods on everything. I just, let's talk about flipping, or let's talk about skipping, or let's talk about, topwater. I did a piece with Charlie Campbell, who had retired by the time I got to him. So he wasn't threatened by anything, but he taught me how to walk a topwater walking bait around a stump, literally around a stump. And I was so, taken by that and how he did it. I said, I want to feature this. And he said, yeah, that'd be great. So I did him in that role. And God, I'm trying to think of all the different guys I did, but these things ran 5 years, and there was 10 publications a year, I believe, maybe 9 or 10. So there was a lot of them that I did. Some of them are on my website. There's a few that I gleaned and put on my website. One was Van Dam with Sluggo style worms. Sorry about the phone ringing in the background.
You're good.
But
is that a landline I hear?
It's a landline, and we never answer it. It's there for security. That's the only reason we keep it is for the alarm. But hopefully it'll end soon. But that was a way to convey current skill sets, things that were happening that were current. Nowadays it's all YouTube, but back then that's what we had. And there was a delay. I mean, if you were waiting on Bob Cobb's, documentation of say the Okeechobee Open or whatever it was a month later, three weeks to a month later. The magazine was slow, but it was a little quicker. And, I don't know, that seemed to be the best way to convey techniques and strategies for catching more bass. And a lot of people followed that column. It got to be really popular, and that's why it ran longer than the year that it was supposed to.
Yeah, I think sometimes people forget how far things have come and how quick, you know what I mean? Like you'll hear people be like, well, why don't they have a camera in every single boat and all these? And trust me, as a fan, I would love to see that. Everybody would love to see that. But you also have to be realistic and be like, Trip Weldon still remembers off the top of his head the number he used to call the bass offices. There was an actual number, a bass hotline that you would call so he could hear at the end of the day. And this was, he told me like he remembers it being like, wow, this is amazing that I can actually call and there's a recorded message that says, in today's tournament, Bernie Schultz is in 10th place, so-and-so is in 9th place, so-and-so, and like with their weights. And he was like, it was amazing that I could get that information like that. Yeah. So in that short period of time, and now we have live bass fishing. And I mean, it's wild how much it's changed.
Huge transformation in not that many years. It's a pretty incredible. We literally do have a camera in every boat now with the personal cameras, but, yeah, I don't know. It's cool that I was able to experience that, be a part of that, and still be a part of what's going on today. I don't know how relevant I am, but I'm still here. I'm not dead yet, so hopefully I can still contribute to the sport in some way. And that's basically, I just want to leave it better than I found it. Hopefully help people catch more fish.
Has that been your goal since day number one, or did you not have long-term thoughts? Was it just, I want to make a living?
Well, initially, yeah, I just want to figure out how to make a living in the sport. And I didn't realize how important illustration and writing would be to my survival until later. It was kind of a nuisance at the time. I mean, I like seeing my stuff published, but it's like trying to fit that in and pre-fish for tournaments and be competitive. And back then I was a lot more competitive, and the wheels were starting to gain momentum. And I don't know, later on I realized, it's probably a good thing that I was able to write and illustrate, or I'd have been long gone. As you well know, attrition is huge in this sport. And back then it was even, I want to say it was even greater because there were fewer tours. Now there's a lot of different places a guy can land if he wants to compete professionally. Back then there weren't many options. And you got flushed out pretty quick if you weren't competitive or if you didn't have the sponsor support.
So who are you away from fishing? What to use a hacky line, what's a weekend at Bernie's really like? What, like, if you can't go fishing, what is a weekend at Bernie's really like? What do you want to do?
I like to play with antique tackle and network with other collectors, research the lures that I find interesting. I write about them. In fact, my column at Bassmaster has featured a number of different antique lures relative to how they relate to contemporary lures. Like I did a series called The First of, the first crankbait, the first swim bait, the first plopper, the first chatterbait. You know, people nowadays think all that stuff's current and it just happened. It just, somebody had, a light bulb went off and they invented the chatterbait. Well, the truth is that was started a lot longer ago than people might realize. The first swim bait, tried 1907. The first hollow-bodied frog, 1895.
Wow.
The first crankbait, 1916. There's a long history with lures in each of those categories, all categories, spinner baits, topwaters, jerk baits. Goes way back farther than people realize. And I like that, and I have an appreciation for that. I like to share that with people once I do the research or I get informed by other collectors on something that I think is pertinent, especially if it relates to something that's trending in our sport today. I like to relate that to people, whether it's through phone conversations, whether I do a video, whether I do a column at bassmaster.com or however I do it. I like to communicate the past to the present people out there that are passionate about the sport. I think it's important.
So, but that's still fishing. If you couldn't go fishing, you couldn't look at old lures, you couldn't talk about it. What do you do? Like, what Sunday? You got the day free. What do you do?
In the yard. I don't know. I kind of like doing that. My wife and I like working in the yard a little bit, just because I'm on the road. So most people are thinking, work in the yard. What's he talking about? That's
just being home, though.
Can be rewarded. Yeah, it's being home, appreciating, where you're dwelling, where you are, what you've made. We're empty nesters now, but the kids still come home, and my oldest boy brings his grandbaby when they come and visit, and so there's still a home base, so to speak, and we try to make it as appealing to them as we can, so we can coax them to come more often.
If you had to design, you've seen incredible pros come throughout this sport, but if me and you could play weird science and design the perfect we're going to design a pro, and you could put 3 traits into that pro to be successful, to be the future superstar of this sport. What 3 traits are you designing into this human individual?
Okay, first of all, he'd have to be athletic. I think you need to be athletic so you need stamina. 8-hour days. Actually, in practice, they can be as much as 12 and 13, maybe even 14-hour days when we go north in the photo period so long. But you got to have a lot of stamina. Need to be healthy and sharp. Stay focused throughout the day. So physically, that's one aspect. You got to meet the criteria for that. Next, you'd have to be really skilled with electronics. There's no way around it. You're going to have to be really comfortable with them and utilize them at every opportunity, try and incorporate them. But then the third would be to have an old school perspective, a more instinctual approach to the game. In case you don't have the benefit of your electronics, or say you're on a shallow water fishery, it's muddy and the fish are shallow, draw on your instincts, how, what lures, what presentations. I think an old school approach needs to be incorporated if we're building the perfect angler, I think those three things.
So instinct, electronics, and athleticism.
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty strong. What about passion and like, do they not need that? Isn't all of that fueled by you have to love it?
Yeah, that I assume that was a given.
Yeah.
So, that's if you don't have the passion, this isn't the sport for you.
Are you still as passionate about this sport as
I am? Yeah. For me, when I'm not on tour, it's more about inshore saltwater fishing. I much more enjoy that. There's no one watching. There's no cameras. There's no, writers, photographers, no sponsor pressure, no media pressure. There's none of that. It's, I'm in my own world out there, and I'm sharing it with whoever I'm in the boat with for that day. And it's just, that to me is very rewarding, very fulfilling. I use light tackle. A lot of times I'm bear hunting with a switch. I mean, I chase tarpon with a 10-pound spinning outfit. I'm using braid, but it's 10-pound braid. I'm using a heavy leader, but it's still 10-pound braid, trying to catch 60 and 80-pound tarpon or 30-pound snook, with that same rod. And I see a lot of fish I'm never going to catch because I don't use live bait. I'm a purist in that sense. I like using artificials, but yeah, that's I'm passionate, and I still have the drive for that. In tournaments, probably not like I did when I was young, but I was hungry and wanted to prove myself. I wanted to make it in the sport when I was young. I figured, if I don't catch another fish, Dave, I'll probably caught my share. But I do like competing, and once I'm there in the tournament mode, I think I'm as competitive up here as anybody on the water. Doesn't always play out that way. I've had a lot of failures, but I'm taking a lot of chances. I want to win, so I'm taking chances that I probably wouldn't have 10 or even, especially 20 or 30 years ago. I would have never taken those chances, and I'm getting burned a lot. The other thing is I don't get any help, and that's probably why I'm at the bottom of the standings. So it's I'm trying to do it, trying to make it happen, and I'm on the wrong side of the hourglass now. I realize that time's ticking, and I'm running out of time to do the things I want to do in the sport. But I still have the drive to, especially once I'm there, once I get there, and I'm in, in battle mode, I guess is a way to look at it.
2 events left in 2025. What's your mindset going into those?
I like both venues. I've had success at both venues. The best I ever finished at Detroit on Lake St. Clair was 4th. The first time bass went there, I finished 4th on largemouth, believe it or not. I tried to make the smallmouth work, couldn't. And I wish I dedicated every day, all day to the largemouth. I think I would have won. I caught more weight each day. Back then you fished 4 days. It was a top 100. And my weights got stronger each day. And I laid off of them the first day. I only had a half day because I spent the first half trying to catch smallmouth, and I couldn't make it work. We didn't have all the finesse techniques back then. It was spinner baits and jerk baits, and you might drag a Carolina rig around or something like that, or a tube. We had tubes, but I couldn't make it work. And so the second half of the day, I went and caught a good stringer of largemouth and got off of them because I thought, there's 3 more days to this event. I don't want to burn them up. And there was an unlimited supply. I had no idea how many fish I was on. Every day my weights got better, and I climbed the ladder board up to 4th. And I've made checks there numerous times since then. I love smallmouth fishing. And now it's all about smallmouth. Yeah. You can catch the odd largemouth and you can even have a good stringer of a largemouth, but to do it 4 days in a row, that's going to be a real challenge at Detroit. So I'm looking forward to that. And then when we get to La Crosse, it's all about largemouth. You can catch good smallmouth, but it's like the inverse of what Detroit offers. You're going to be hard pressed to catch 4 days of quality stringers of smallmouth. Your odds are better with largemouth there, but I like both fisheries. I like what's ahead.
It'll be a fun end to the season. 2 very different events. We're not going to be on Sabine where people are trying, hoping to get a limit. I mean, you're going to have a lot of limits, and it'll be a fun end to the season.
Yeah, both will be a game of ounces. It's hard to separate yourself from the field when it's ounces, and if you get behind, it's almost impossible to catch up. It's really difficult when a game, when that game is so tightly played. Guys will be tied at multiple weight levels. Like you could come in with 20 pounds and there'd be 5 other guys tied with you.
Yeah.
And there'll be another 20 that are within ounces of you. Yeah. So it's hard to separate yourself.
You can catch them and not catch them. Like,
that's right.
People come in.
That's right.
Check in. They're like, I had a great day. And then by the end of the way, and they're like, I didn't have a great day anymore. I mean,
yeah.
It's pretty wild.
I shared that, that was true for 10 Killer.
Yeah.
Ever since Cliff retired from the tour, everybody knows most people know I traveled with Cliff Prince for years, and I miss him. He was best roommate ever. But I'm with a group of guys now they keep it fun and they keep it regimented. I mean, we're serious about it. It's Will Davis Jr., Tim Doobie, and Mark Menendez. And we talked about this after 10 Killer, that you can be catching fish at 10 Killer thinking you're gaining ground when you're only digging yourself a hole. Yeah. You get a lot of bites there, but the weights are so tight and it's hard to get the kicker fish to climb the leaderboard. You think you're doing well and you're really losing ground.
I've run a Yamaha outboard for over 30 years. It has got me home safe each and every time. If you enjoy this podcast, remember, Yamaha supports it and they care enough about you to make this ad read very short. Now back to the show.
What's the greatest advice you've ever been given in your life? And I know that's a crazy question, but if you had to think of...
my dad taught me my work ethic. My mom and my dad, both of them worked. I think time on the water, whoever said it first is probably, as it relates to fishing, I'm trying to answer your question in that context. Time on the water is the best advice you can give anybody. You're not going to learn it reading books and looking at YouTube videos forever. You're going to have to get out there and apply those things. And until you do that, and you got to be out there to take in what's going on around you. Learn to read the signs and, birds diving or wind direction changes, current starts flowing or subtleties, any subtlety, water clarity, water temperature, pH, any of that stuff. You're going to learn that on the water and trial and error. Even with electronics, it's about presentation and what presentation worked, what presentation didn't work, and trying to hone those skills. So I say time on the water is the best advice I've been given and that I can pass along.
You've given a lot to this sport, and I thank you for that. What has the sport of fishing given to you?
A livelihood. Dave, like I said earlier, I haven't set any records in the sport, but I've had a lot of success in other areas. I helped develop some of the most successful lures for numerous companies. I helped develop gear, not lures specifically, but gear and rods, reels, tackle boxes. And I can hang my hat on a lot of that. I really enjoyed the boardroom as much as being on the water, helping companies succeed, being a part of that, being a part of marketing, advertising. I know what makes a good ad, and I was able to, pass that to some of the companies I worked with. I got fulfillment in that, being able to illustrate for, Bassmaster all those years, for Bass Times all those years, illustrating books for Roland Martin and Bill Dance and the Best of Bassmaster. That was rewarding. Writing for all the different publications and, Just Fishing, Inside Line, helping companies develop product like the spinnerbaits I designed for Hildebrandt, the lures I helped develop with Rapala, working with Mark Fisher at Rapala. there was a lot of reward in that. Still a lot of reward in that. And nowadays, getting to work with my son, my oldest son, he's a rep. We talked about that. We share some of the same companies. He reps them and I promote them. So we cross paths quite a bit, whether it's an in-store promotion or ICAST or the Classic or whatever. Having that connection, with family in a professional level that's rewarding. So the sport's been good. My wife was able to be a stay-at-home mom. She did a remarkable job with both our boys. They're both healthy and both on their own. And so I was very fortunate in that regard. The sport gave back to me what I needed to survive and prosper in that regard. So I've got no complaints.
Well, you've given a lot to the sport, and I just need you to make me one promise. After you win St. Clair, you come back on.
Oh yeah, I'm open to you anytime. I'm a fanboy. People don't realize, and I want to write your story. You keep saying no, but at some point I'm going to crack the nut and get your story. People don't realize, like when we take off in the morning, there's 100 guys lined up, and we go through that process of boat check and live well check and all that, kill switch. And meanwhile, you're giving basically a condensed version of each guy's resume right off the top of your head. And that's remarkable. And it's almost like you're a savant in some ways when it comes to regurgitating that stuff. And then when we get to the stage, people see you looking at the scale. They may think you're looking at notes, but we know the truth. All that stuff's in your head, and you're flawless with it. It's remarkable that you can remember each guy, what he did in the last tournament, what he did last year, what he's done over his career. You know their sponsors, you know their families, and it's all like that. I don't know how you do it. I mean, I struggle with recall, and you're phenomenal in that regard, and we're lucky to have you because of that.
Well, thank you.
That's true.
I'm not good with compliments.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. That's the way other guys see it.
I appreciate it. And I will, one simple answer. It's the same reason that people passion. I love what I do. I don't know that I could, like I always joke where people see how much I do at a bass event and I run around. They're like, oh, you got so much energy. And I'm like, it's amazing. If you put me on that construction crew, they would be like, Mercer is the laziest dude on the entire. But if you love something, and I mean, I'll let you write myself. It's not that I don't want you to. I just always feel like I'm the intro guy. It shouldn't be a story about me. It should be stories about other anglers, like that I'm a weirdo, but you've been on the podcast. I can't say no anymore. So anything you want, Bernie.
Everybody's got a story. I just feel like everybody has a story. Whatever degree you're involved with the sport and however successful you've been in the sport, everybody has a story. How did they get to where they are? And I like to tell those stories, and I've done so. I would invite anybody that's watching this to Google some of the stuff I've written for Bassmaster, for Inside Line, for Just Fishing in Canada. Yeah. I write outside the box. I don't write about technique all the time. I don't write about specific lures and, how they're applied. I talk about people at times. I did a series called Lessons from Legends, and I featured guys like Forrest Wood, Ray Scott, Ken Cook, Shaw Grigsby, Guido Hibden, and all those guys teach you something. Aaron Martins. It was less about technique. Most people think about technique. They think of Aaron Martins, all about tackle, all about preparation, all about execution. But he taught me some other things. And so I invite anybody watching this to go and find those columns, look for Lessons from Legends, Bassmaster on Google, in a Google search, and you'll find them. They're great stories about those individuals and their path to where they ended up. And then the first lure series that I did, learn about the history of the sport, learn about the first crankbait, the first swim bait, the first hollow-bodied frog, all those. I did a bunch of those things, and they're very insightful, not because I wrote them, but because of the material that I was able to find on them. It speaks to how our sport got to where it is today. And to me, that's extremely important. I feel like anglers, especially at our level, are obligated to know the history of the sport, something about it anyway, and how we got to where we are. A lot of people think that, it just happened in the 60s. Our sport's been going on since the 1800s and before. Yeah. So, and I'm talking about bass fishing.
Yeah. No, a healthy respect for the past is very, very important. I mean, that's your foundation. That's what got you there.
Got us all here. That's
and if
right.
you forget about the past, just like your house, if you forget about the foundation, it doesn't matter how beautiful the outside of your house is. Guess what? It all comes crumbling down. So
it's a house of cards. That's right.
But thank you, Bernie. I've enjoyed this. Yeah,
something different. I appreciate the opportunity.
So we'll see you in a few weeks' time at Lake St. Clair.
You will.
So that's it. That's all a great conversation with Bernie Schultz. We will definitely have him on again to talk about baits and kind of the evolution of so many baits that I kind of teased at the beginning of this show. I hope you enjoyed this one. This has been MERCER-221. And guess what? Next Wednesday, you can listen to MERCER-222. And the Wednesday after that, 220. You get the pattern, right? I will see you next Wednesday. Hope you have a great week. Enjoy being, and as always, Bob Cobb, take it away.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because Bob Cobb of the Bassmasters told you to. You hear?